I have been going so far with I think 4 shiurim, in really going into tremendous detail about what the entire saga of Mitzrayim was. And one of the reasons for that is because that is the model of the future redemption. You see, in other words, all the ideas, all the different aspects and details and the major themes that we see in Egypt, the Exodus from Egypt, really is identical to what happens in the end of time. And therefore, I have been going into this with such detail, so you understand it not only from a historical perspective, but from also a mystical perspective, Kabbalistic, and so on. So you can actually look into a different type of window, what the historical event called the Exodus from Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim, really was about from a cosmic standpoint. So therefore, that's what I've been doing. And it continues as we get closer to Matan Torah. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue with certain very fascinating ideas in terms of the whole concept of Sphira and Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, and certainly ideas which I think most people are unfamiliar with. In any case, now we know, I mentioned I think last time, that the major idea of Mitzrayim is to take away the sparks, the nitzotzes, which is the sparks of holiness, right? And to take them and transfer them from the Satan, the Sitra Achra, the other side, to what's called the Sitra de Kedusha, the side of holiness, which means to put them back into the spheres. That transfer of nitzotzes. If that happens, we know that the Zoyama of the Satan, and you know what the Zoyam is, I explained it extensively, right? It's his force that he's able to project, and that's the Tumah, basically. And therefore the Zoyama collapses, and he is evicted, the Satan that is, from the human body, and eventually he will die. If all the sparks leave him, he dies. So this is the major mystical or Kabbalistic theme of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And really that's what the Jews had accomplished in Egypt. For the first time in history, after Adam Harishon, the first man, introduced all this, where the sparks went into the hands of the Satan and so on, the Jews had succeeded basically in taking it out. And because of that, because the Zoyama collapses, and by the way, also the 4 worlds, which I had mentioned in the first year, the 4 environments of evil also collapsed, you see. And like I said, I had mentioned this previously. So that is characterized by what's called the Atzmus Yosef, which I also mentioned. And Yosef, who's the forerunner of Mashiach ben Yosef, right? So when they took his bones out of Egypt, what they really took is the Or Rishon, or the Or Mashiach, the Messianic light, or the first light, right? They took that out of Egypt, you see, because that Or, that light, what it really is that ability to have insight into the spiritual realms, right, which is what the Mashiach is going to reveal, right? All of that was what's called in the hands of the Klippa, in the hands of the Satan, you see, because that's what it means that the sparks of holiness are in the hands of the Satan. So we fail to see the Messianic light, which is an understanding of the upper worlds and how everything connects. And that is symbolized in the Atzmus Yosef. Until now, Yosef, right, is buried in the Nile. That means that the light that he represents is also buried in the Nile, you see, which means that the Sultan has access to that, you see. In any case, so when the Jews took out the sparks, they took out the messianic light from the what's called the klipa, from the tumah, from the hands of the Sultan. And that is symbolized by Yosef's bones being taken out of Egypt. And I mentioned that it's not just Atzmos Yosef, it can be read Atzmus Yosef or Atzmut Yosef, which means the essence of Yosef, because Etzem also means an essence. In any case, this is what's happening. So we see actually there's a sequence here, right? One, Jews, by sinning, or the world before that, before Avram, gives nitzotzes, gives sparks to the Satan. Two, he uses it, right, in order to control the world, right, and to get the world to try to rebel or defy God. Three, the task, then I'm looking at the overview, then the task is to take out these sparks from the Satan. And then, of course, he dies. All his environments, called klipot, collapse, you see. And because of that, the messianic light now enters creation, or I should say enters this world. That's basically the scenario of redemption. That's basically the scenario of what everything is all about, you see. And we see also, of course, that the messianic light, of course, is the last stage. And that is represented by the bones of Yosef. That's what's coming out of Egypt. And of course, it's going to be heading toward Mount Sinai. And to show that this is true, if you recall, I had said, when God spoke to Avram Avinu, and he said after that they will go out with great possessions. The gematria of Yetzu B'Rechush Gadol is gematria holy sparks, the Tzosei Kedusha, because that's really right what they're taken out of Egypt. And this is what you understand now. Now, when they're going out in Beshalach, it says V'yotzu kol tzivus Hashem me'eretz Mitzrayim, and all the hosts of God went out of Egypt, right? Now we know what are the hosts of God besides the Jewish people and so on. It's also the sparks that also went out of Egypt. Therefore, the gematria of Yotzu, Tzivus Hashem, right, is also gematria Nitzotzei Kedusha, sparks of holiness. And of course, that's remarkable. So whether they were captured, now they have to be released. It's all about this incredible divine energy, which is now going to be available to the Jewish people. And of course, that is ultimately what the Luchas Rishonis, what the first tablets were. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu himself is Mashiach ben Yosef. That's who he really is, and he fulfilled, if you think about it, the purpose. He took the Jews out of the Tumah, the Zoyamot, right? He brought them to Eretz Yisrael without entering it. He gave them the Torah, you see? So in many ways, he did the job of Mashiach ben Yosef. And then by Matan Torah, by the giving of the Torah, of course, there was the Luchas Rishonis. There are the first tablets. Now those first tablets is really the Messianic light. That's really what they are. In many ways, they're magical. You know, it says that if you were looking at the tablets from one side, automatically you could read that side as well as the other side without having to turn around the tablets. And that's really what the Or Mashiach is. It is the ability to see completely through any type of phenomena, any type. And this is really what the Luchas Rishonis were, you see. So, therefore, those first tablets were really the Messianic light. That's really what it was, you see. But because of the Egel, the sin of the golden calf, then automatically the Zoyama returned, the Satan was energized, and he was able to again project his Zoyama, his pollution, and that re-entered the body of the Jew, you see. So obviously, the Luchas Rishonis, which Moshe Rabbeinu would have given the Jewish people, could no longer be given to the Jewish people, because the Messianic light cannot come to Jews if the Zoyama is in their body. That is a very important precondition. One cannot live, so to speak, side by side with the other. In other words, the Zoyama is an exact conflict, contradiction, opposite, right, of the Messianic light. So therefore, this Luchas Rishonis, right, which Moshe Rabbeinu was going to give the Jewish people, could no longer be given to the Jews, because they had reintroduced the Zoyama back. Therefore, what the Rebbe Shem had to do, obviously, is called the Luchas Shnius. He had to give second tablets. And those tablets were no longer the Messianic light, you see. They were the Torah in the form of halachas, things that the Jews would now have to do, the mitzvahs and so on, in order to again begin the process of evicting the Satan and destroying him, and then ultimately bringing the Messianic light. And that was what's called the Luchas Shnius, the second Luchas. In other words, it was Torah, but it was no longer the Torah, right, as a reward, right, or the ultimate outcome of removing the Zoyama, where you see everything down to its ultimate cause. No longer was that true. The Torah was now in the form of what is called the instrument. One of the ideas to understand is, what are the mitzvahs really, you see? Now, the mitzvahs themselves are not reward, obviously. Many times they have a lot of difficulty in Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, in performing them. But what the mitzvahs really are instruments, triggers, where they are an instrument to bring down the lights or the energy or the power of the spheres. It's an instrument. It's like you walk into a room and you turn on the light switch. When you do a mitzvah, it releases somewhere in the structure of heaven, it releases an ore of the spheres, you see. And that ore in some way comes down and in a certain way addresses you, you see. But that's what the Torah is. You see, it's the form of instrument. But the Torah is also the form of, if you want to think about it, reward. That's the consequence, which is the light itself that was released because of the mitzvahs, which are the instrument. You see, that's really the relationship between the original tablets, the first tablets, and the second tablets. The first tablets is the Orishon, or the Or Mashiach, the Messianic light, which is really what's called the payoff. That's really the reward, you see. And the second Luchas Shnius, is what? Is the Torah in its form of the instrument. What are the things or the mitzvahs that you have to perform to again destroy the Satan by taking out all the sparks of holiness? That's the clear distinction. One is the instrument, second Luchas, and the first Luchas is the reward, right? Or the actual, the consequence of doing the mitzvahs, which of course ultimately is all of the lights will be revealed, not in the Messianic era, but all of the enormous amount of spheres will be released in the future world, Olam Habo. And we have no idea of what that means when all the energy and light of the spheres will be released. Now, what is interesting is this. Moshe Rabbeinu had a tremendous quandary. He had a big problem. Now, you'll notice one thing. When the Rebbe Hashem said to Moshe, after the Chet Egel, He said to Moshe, Lech, raid, go down, right? Because your nation has corrupted itself. You see? So imagine that. Here's Moshe Rabbeinu holding the first tablets, which is the Messianic light. And God says, while he's still up there, right, is that you go down, because go down means go down from your ability to be Mashiach, because you can't, because the Jewish people no longer deserve it, because they sin, and we know the sin of the golden calf. Now the amazing thing is this, is that Moshe Rabbeinu, what does he do, right? He goes down the mountain, sees the Jews sinning, and he takes the tablets and he throws them at the bottom of the mountain, and it shatters, probably into 1,000 pieces. Now that's very odd behavior. Why? Imagine if somebody gives you jewelry, right? A diamond necklace. And he says, do me a favor, give it to such and such person who I know lives on your block. I tell the kids, let's say, comes to the door, and he says, is your father home? And the kid said, no. Well, can I speak to him? The kid said, well, you can't. He went away on a business trip. He went away to Israel, right? So, or the kid says the mother also went with him, so you can't even give it to her. So you say, thank you. The kid closes the door, and you figure, what do you figure? Well, I can't give it to them, right? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw it in the garbage pail. Does that make sense? Of course not. You can't do that just because the recipient is no longer there. You can't destroy that which you're supposed to give. But isn't that what Moshe Rabbeinu did? What he should have done, right, when the Rebbeinu Shem told him, your nation has corrupted itself, what the Moshe Rabbeinu should have said, okay, obviously they cannot have this now because they reintroduced the Zoyama into their body. So here, God, take it back. Isn't that what he should have done? Of course. And not only that, God told him, your nation has corrupted itself. All right. So not only Moshe should have given it back to God, but God should have said to Moshe, give it to me back. You can't give it to the Jews, because here's what happens. If a person receives something which is much greater than their capacity for spirituality, they can die because they can't handle it. It's an interesting concept. You have to be at a certain level because it would kill them all. Because now that they had the Zoyama back in their body, they could not in any way receive. They didn't have the capacity to receive the Messianic light. So either the Rebbeinu Shem should have said to Moshe, give it to me back, because they can't have it. Or Moshe should have said to the Rebbeinu Shem, take it back, right? Instead, what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? Moshe Rabbeinu takes it and he throws it at the bottom of the mountain. He shatters it, which is the equivalent of a man throwing the gift in the garbage because the parents are not home. Now, of course, this doesn't make any sense. And not only that, what's even a double mystery is the Gemara mentions this, that Moshe Rabbeinu did certain things, and God agreed with him, and not only that, he said, Yasher Koyach, which means congratulations, that you did this. It's amazing. So when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchos, God said, Yasher Koyach, congratulations, which means that the Rebbeinu Shem was maskim. He agreed with what Moshe did. So the question is, wait a minute, where did Moshe Rabbeinu think about doing this? How could this be a solution? It's true that the Jews are not worthy of receiving it. Fine. So give it back to God. How did Moshe Rabbeinu know what to do? That is the question. And not only that, why didn't Rebbeinu Shem ask for it back? And why did he say, Yasher Koyach? It's interesting. But here's really what happened, you see. The truth is, Moshe Rabbeinu had a tremendous problem. What is the problem? Because imagine in his hand is the power source of the Messianic light. That's the first tablets. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized, I cannot give it to the Jews. Why? Because it'll kill them. They cannot receive this type of Kedusha, of holiness, much too overpowering. So Moshe Rabbeinu looked, and he didn't know what to do. But he realized something. Wait a minute. Why isn't God asking the Luchos Rishonos back? So he realized that God does not want it back. He doesn't want it back. In a certain sense, he wants Jews will not experience any of the Messianic light until the Mashiach comes. And that is terrible, you see. So Moshe Rabbeinu realized that. It's interesting. The Baruch Hashem doesn't want it back. That tells me that he really wants me to figure out a way to give it to the Jews. But the problem is, it'll kill them, you see. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu figured it out. I mean, take a look at what he has to be bothered with, his concerns. It was always about the Jews. How can I raise and elevate their spiritual level? So this was the incredible compromise. He said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take it down, but I can't give it to them where they can read the Luchos Rishonos. What I'm going to do is bust it. I'm going to break it up by shattering it, let's say, into 1,000 pieces. So, and then where are those pieces now? So the Gemara Masechta Shabbos says that Shivrei Luchos, the shards, the pieces of the Luchos Rishonos, are in the Oren. They were actually put in the Oren, and the second Luchos is also in the Oren. And behind that, scattered, is the pieces of the first. So here's what Moshe Rabbeinu understood. I can't give it to them outright because it'll kill them. But you know what I'm going to do? I will give them the fragments. So here's what it solves. They can't read it. If they can't read it, they won't die because they don't understand it. But because they have the pieces, they will actually experience the Kedusha, the unbelievable force of the spheres that are tied to these tablet stones, pieces. You see, so therefore, even though we don't have the Messianic light, we do have, right, allusions, hints. At least that will help us elevate ourselves in Kedusha, you see. And of course, what was that? That's the whole study of Kabbalah. Because the Messianic light really is Kabbalah. It's all about the upper worlds, the interface, who is God, the interface between God and the physical world, right? And how we connect with the upper worlds. It's about another reality, Kabbalah. And that reality is given to us because we have the Luchos Rishonos. It's interesting. So Moshe Rabbeinu solved the problem, you see. And therefore God said, Yashikoyach. Why? Because God doesn't want it back. He wants the Jews to have it. But the problem is they can't. So he said, Yashikoyach, congratulations to Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu came up with the perfect compromise. You see? Where they will have the Luchos Rishonos, but it's unintelligent. Look, he had to always be at the top of his game, so to speak, in order to figure out, and it's not the first time, how to help the Jews, even though they're sinning so many times. And he always had to figure it out. That's the true leadership of who Moshe Rabbeinu really is. Now, I want to tell you something. If the Jews had taken or gotten the Luchos Rishonos, what happens? In the Messianic era, what's going to happen? Then every Jew, we will see more, but every Jew will do what? You can close your eyes, sit down, and all of a sudden you become an incredible Novi, prophet. Because remember, there's no Zoyamah that is blocking, right, your ability to see that Messianic light. You will have complete clarity of whatever concepts you are realizing, Remember, this is the highest level of prophecy that you will be experiencing. Not only will you have complete clarity of the ideas, but you will understand the implications of the ideas. Because many times you have an idea and it has implications, derivatives, what can be derived from the idea. So you will automatically know that as well. Not only that, there will be no hardship whatsoever. I mean, now when you learn, right, what happens? You have to struggle to understand what's called a sugya in Gemara, right? It's hard. Many times you can spend weeks on one sugya. But the Messianic light just goes into your head without any difficulty whatsoever. And the reason for that is because the Zoyama that is part of you acts as a barrier, acts as a block, not to see this incredible spiritual and divine knowledge. That's what makes it so hard, you see. And it's interesting, and one of the ways of manifestation of the blockage is that all of a sudden you don't see the idea, or you have a lot of different questions, right? And you don't know the answers. All of that is a manifestation of this blockage of the Zoyama, what's called the Klippas. And not only that, there's a tremendous speed. You can know the ideas of the Messianic light with tremendous acceleration and speed. And then besides that, you experience the knowledge, not as knowledge, you see. And what's very interesting is that all of this information in the Messianic light is super organized. You see, it's no longer difficult to figure it out because it's all over the place. You see, and I'm going to talk about that. But it's tremendously organized. Everything is in its right place. All the relationships between the Torah ideas are revealed completely, automatically, and immediately. Yes, that's what it is. It's an entirely different way of relating and connecting to God and the spiritual universe. In any case, so this is really what the experience of the Luchas Rishonim is this, you see. Once the Jews sin at the golden calf, and this is a very important idea, then the Torah itself, not only will the Zoyama re-enter the body of the Jew, but the Torah, which is the Luchas Rishonos, itself entered the Klippa. What does that mean? Well, what it means is what I'm saying. It now became incredibly difficult to access Torah. In other words, what surrounds the Torah now is what's called the Klippa, is the Satan, is the Zoyama. And that serves as a barrier to learning and understanding the Torah. And that's why Torah is so difficult, which is interesting. If Torah was not surrounded by the Zoyama, then it would be, right, the Or Rishon, and it would be exactly like I said before. Complete clarity, all the implications, easy. It would be a real experience, tremendous speed, and incredible organization, you see? But since the Torah is surrounded by a Klippa, the Torah is surrounded by the Zoyama itself, therefore we don't have any of this. Torah is very difficult to learn, right? It takes hours to figure out any implication. It's very hard, right? And the speed, forget about the speed, it takes years to figure out the Torah. And in many ways, the Torah itself is disorganized, if you think about that. The Torah is like a jigsaw puzzle, right? If I give you 1,000 pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, right, what's the first thing you're going to ask me for? You're going to ask me for the box, because you need to see the picture. Torah is like 1,000 pieces, but there's no box. That's one of the reasons why Torah is so difficult to understand, because the relationship between many, many ideas is not revealed, you see. And all of this is because of the Zoyama, of creation. You see, very important idea. In fact, in the Gemara, it says a pasuk in Iyov, "B'mechashchim hishivani," you have placed me in darkness. I think it's an echo. You have placed me in darkness. And the Gemara says something which is really incredible. The Gemara says, Zu Talmud Bavli. This is the Babylonian Talmud. In other words, when it says that you have placed me in darkness, it refers to the Babylonian Talmud. What does that mean? So there are different shatim and so on. But one of the central ideas is that when you learn Gemara, it's like going through darkness. It's like trying to put a jigsaw puzzle together, right, without a box. That's darkness. Why? And the answer is because that's the klipah. That's what happened to the Torah as a result of the fact, right, that the Jews sinned in the golden calf, and therefore the Zoyamor re-entered creation in the sense of the Jewish body, but it also surrounds the Torah itself. So not only do we not have access to the Kabbalistic information or the information of the entire reality called the heavenly reality and so on, right? But also it's surrounded with barriers, very difficult. But that means something very important. That means that the task of learning Torah is really, you have to take it out of the klipah. You need to take the Torah out of the Zoyamor. That's really the task. Because if that ever happened, what would happen? It would be like the Orishan, like the Messianic light. It would immediately emerge, right, from the Zoyamor, and it would be tremendous clarity, easy, speed, organized, and all the implications. And you would experience it emotionally. So, therefore, the real task of Torah, strangely enough, isn't to learn the Torah, but it's to take it out of the klipah, out of the Zoyamor. The question is, how do you do that? You see, and the answer is yagio, effort, right? That's the way. That's why the more a person is yagia, the more a person labors and strives and works hard and sweats to learn the Torah, the greater is the breakage of the Zoyamor, of the klipah that surrounds the Torah. Yes, it's very interesting. So it's interesting why? Because somebody could learn the Torah and really sweat over it in New York, and therefore he could break the klipah that surrounds an idea of Torah in New York. But since the klipah is broken, right, on that piece of Torah, then somebody in Los Angeles learning that piece at the same time will now know that piece of Torah because somebody else broke the klipah. It's interesting. But we now begin to realize what the essential task is, you see, is to take it out of the klipah, to remove the barriers where it now becomes a different type of Torah. Yagio is the critical idea. And now we understand why it says, Hema Melem, V'anachnu Amelem. They give effort. Amelem means they are omel. They strive. They expend a lot of effort. V'anachnu Amelem. And we do it. They strive to know the Eina Makabim Schar. And we're referring to non-Jews. They do not get reward for this. Why? Because in the non-Jewish world, what counts isn't how much you struggled, it's what do you know. If you know the stuff, great. If you struggled and it took you 10 hours to figure it out, who cares? You know, it's nice. But the main idea is not the effort. The main idea, right, is the product. That's the idea. But in Judaism, it says they labor, right, and they do not receive reward, right? Their reward only comes with knowing the fact. Our reward comes v'anachnu amelem, but we mekablim schar. We get reward. Why? Because it's a very strange idea. Because the main idea of a Jew is not just to learn it, right? But it's to break the barriers that surround it, that surrounded it at the time of Matan Torah, you see, is to break those barriers, and as a result of that, it will become free. It will be the Orushim. It's a fascinating understanding of an entirely different objective, you see. And that's what the essential idea is, you see. In any case, so therefore we now understand many, many different things, you see. Now, to continue, we know also that God revealed the first two commandments in the Ten Commandments, right? I'm the Lord your God that took you out of Egypt, right? And you shall have no other gods before me, and so on. Those two commandments were not given by Moshe. We know that they were given by God directly to the Jews. That is why the numerical value of Torah is not 613, it's 611. Because the Torah Moshe is only 611 commandments. Two of them, first two of the Ten Commandments, were given directly by God to the Jewish people, which is amazing, you see. And God wanted to do that, you see. So it comes out that the Jews were the recipient, right, of the first two commandments of the Torah, not through Moshe Rabbeinu, which has tremendous implications. One is that the only way you could receive Torah, especially if you're the first one, is if you have the level of prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. So it comes out that for those two mitzvahs, which were revealed directly to every single Jew at Har Sinai, they were all equal to Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of his prophecy. So it says that Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, was the greatest prophet that ever lived, right? So therefore, it comes out that every Jew experienced the level of prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. They had to, because they were the conduit of the first two mitzvahs for the rest of the Jew, for all time. And therefore, they had to have the clarity of that prophetic, level. Because to receive the Torah, you have to have prophecy at the highest level, so that it should be completely clear. That's amazing. Why did God do that? Why didn't He just give the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu? Why give the Jews the first two mitzvahs? And not only that, what is even more amazing is the Medrash says, Chazal tell us, that it was so overpowering. Could you imagine God reveals to you the same way He revealed Himself to Moshe? He reveals to you, and He actually gives you the Torah directly to you. You see, that level of holiness was so great that every Jew died. This is what the Chazal tell us. Everybody died because they could not handle the prophetic level of a person, what he has to have when he receives the Torah. You see, now Moshe was used to that, because as the Chazal tell us, he was half man, half God, you see, but not the Jews. The Jews had just come out of Egypt, right? And it was the 50 days after Egypt. They certainly were not at that level. Yet it said they all died. So the Torah, Chazal tell us, came in front of God, whatever living entity represents the Torah, and He said, I don't understand, who are you going to give me to, a dead people? So God said, no, I am now going to resurrect them. And He gave them the dew of Tchias HaMesim, and all the Jews were resurrected. Now that's incredible. This is Tchias HaMesim, isn't it? Because obviously He had to resurrect them to give the rest of the Torah, you see. And when the Jews were resurrected, they all came running to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, you give us the Torah. We cannot tolerate this. And that this is all in the Chumash. So that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to give the rest of the Torah. But what do we see? We see certain things which are actually unbelievable. That God wanted to give not just the first two mitzvahs, He wanted to give all the mitzvahs to the Jews, not through Moshe. This is what we begin to see. And the only reason why he didn't is because the Jews said, we cannot tolerate this, right? We can't do this. We're all going to die again. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, he was the conduit to receive the Torah itself. But how do we begin to really understand this? You see, now the idea of Tchias HaMesim, now God knew they would die. Obviously, he knew they would die, right? So why did he give the first two commandments, even if he wanted to? And then they're all dead, and then he has to resurrect them. Because I had mentioned that the real way of removing the Zoyamor, right, is death. Because the body decomposes, the Zoyamor leaves, and then the body becomes pure Geshem, and then the Neshama goes back. That's Tchias HaMesim, isn't it? Right? Therefore, that's the only way to remove the Zoyamor. So what God wanted, now that the Jews had removed the Zoyamor, right, they did so with the suffering in Egypt and so on. But that only removed the basic foundation. But the residue of the Zoyamor had to be removed also, so therefore they all had to die, experienced Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. Then when they got up, they had no Zoyamor. You see? So that was on purpose. The Jews, God knew they would die, and on purpose he had them die, so they now can remove the Zoyamor, right? Because that's what death does. And as a result of that, all the Jews have no Zoyamor. It's now all the Satan is now external to the human body, and they're only Geshem. You see? Actually, if you think about it, that's really what happens in Gan Eden. A person dies. Now, I had said quite a while ago that a person is supposed to have zikuch. Zikuch is, well, first you have to remove the Zoyamor, and then the Neshama re-enters the body, Tchias HaMesim, and purifies the body itself to a higher level. And that is the ascent that a person does, where he goes from a world of Geshem, material, goes to the world of spiritual, then goes to the world of the divine, where he is the Neshama in Olam Haba. However, since the Neshama cannot mezakeh, cannot purify Zoyamor, that's why a person dies. He dies, right? Zoyamor leaves, right? But meanwhile, where does the Neshama go? It's got to wait until Tchias HaMesim, to resurrection of the dead. So the soul goes to Gan Eden, which is a holding spot. It's really what it is. It's an area where all the neshamas are waiting to re-enter their bodies by Tchias HaMesim, and then zikuch, right, purification of the body, can now begin to take place at a certain level. That's why there is a Gan Eden, you see, because a neshama cannot remove or purify Zoyamor, you see. So that's why you have Tchias HaMesim, and that is why you have Gan Eden, you see. And that is why God knew that the Jews would die, and as a result of that, right, they would die, and he would be able to remove the Zoyamor, externalize the Zoyamor, and these Jews would now be Geshem, right, which is a fit way of receiving the Luchas Rishonos, the tablet itself. So we now understand. But what we really begin to understand is something which is amazing. You see, what is God's original plan? If it wasn't for the golden calf, it would have been a completely different plan. You see, one, every Jew would have been a residence of the divine plan. Without Zoyamor, each Jew would become a Beis HaMikdash, right? Because it says in Truma, when God commands to build the Beis HaMikdash, a Mishkan, he says, "V'shochanti b'soicham," and I will dwell in their midst. It should have said, "and I will dwell in it," means the tabernacle, the Mishkan. But it says, "I will dwell in them." What does that mean? That means the residence of God is really the neshama, and that's how he enters creation, through the neshama. So in a certain sense, we are the Beis Hamikdash. You see. So before the golden calf, every Jew would have been a Beis Hamikdash, and God would have entered creation into the Neshama, and every Jew would have been like a Beis Hamikdash, a resident of God. But because of the sin of the golden calf, right, then as a result of that, V'shochanti b'soicham, and I will dwell in their midst, still holds true. In other words, God enters the creation through the neshama of a Jew, because we are the residents. But because of the sin of the golden calf and the Zoyama, right, we do not experience the Shekhinah internally, even though internally is how God enters creation. You see, the only way to experience the Shekhinah is you have to go to the Beis Hamikdash, which now becomes a building. You see the change. Before this, every Jew should have been the Beis Hamikdash, because God enters creation like the portal of this world for the entry of the Shekhinah is the neshama of the Jew. But since the sin of the golden calf, the Jew can no longer feel and experience the Shekhinah within him, so he has to go to a place in Yerushalayim, right, the Beis Hamikdash, to experience it. But that's a result of the sin of the golden calf. You see, that's what God wanted, is that each Jew should be the Beis Hamikdash, even though there would have been also a Mishkan, but that's in order to bring sacrifices or offerings, right? And also, not then, but later on, to unify the Jews in the Regel, which there are 3 pilgrimage festivals. But in the beginning, that's not the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash, because each Jew would be a Beis Hamikdash, you see. So that's the first idea, you see. Now, that's what God wanted, is that each Jew should be a Beis Hamikdash, number one. And the second thing God wanted, right, is that each Jew should receive the Torah by himself, not through Moshe. That's why the first 2 wasn't an accident, but God revealed himself to each Jew the way he revealed himself to Moshe, because that revelation encompassed 2 mitzvahs, you see. So really, God wanted every Jew to be the conduit, to be the makabel of Torah. But they didn't do it, you see. They said we cannot tolerate that type of holiness, right? And therefore what we need to do is, please, you be the conduit. That's really what God's plan was originally. And that plan will be restored, you see, in the Messianic era. The Messianic era is very different than what is now, you see. The Messianic era is where each Jew really will be a Beis Hamikdash. Of course, we will have the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi, as I had mentioned, the 3rd Beis Hamikdash. But that will be for the purposes where the divine presence also rests, you see. But that is for the purpose of offerings, which there are some, and also for the purpose of the pilgrimage festivals, where all the Jews can get together and unify as a nation in the front of the Beis Hamikdash. So there will always be a Beis Hamikdash, but for the purposes of residence of the divine presence, the Shekhinah, every Jew will be a Beis Hamikdash. It's something we cannot even begin to understand. And that's how really, since there will be that is how each Jew experiences the divine energy, the messianic light itself. You see? So that will be restored in the Messianic era. Because in the Messianic era, there is no Zoyama, you see. And there's no barrier to the Torah, because the Jews will have been successful of eliminating the Zoyama and the Satan, because he will be dead or removed completely. So there is no longer any Zoyama, you see. Now, we don't have any idea what that means, you see. But from the original idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, from that original event, the fact that God gave each Jew 2 mitzvahs directly, without Moshe, not through Moshe, tells us what the intent or the original plan really was. But it's interesting. So we see, therefore, that the Jews rejected that plan, right? And therefore the question is, well, does that mean the plan of God is foiled? Right? Obviously, that's what happened. He went so far as to give them the 2 commandments. They all died, and then he resurrected them, which means that was the complete eviction of the Zoyamo, right? And then they had the last test, which I mentioned, and that was kill the son, right? And, of course, they ran to Moshe and said, we can't do this. And then, of course, then they did the Egel. But what happens to God's plan? So we know that in the Messianic era, it will be rejuvenated, right? But the truth is there's something else which went on. God did not give up. And there's an incredible idea or event that happened that God did not want to give up. He still wanted the Jews to receive the Torah, all of them by themselves, and that they themselves would be a Beis Hamikdash. But I will tell you that next week. Any questions?
Anybody there? Yeah.
Any questions?
So my question is that the neshama is located in our brain, right?
The neshama is located, yes, it's connected to the brain.
Okay. And that gives us the ability to connect to the spirituality of Hashem and the mitzvah.
Yes. Well, really, there's two aspects to the neshama which is higher. It's called the chaya and yachidi. There are 5 parts of the neshama.
Correct.
The nefesh connected to the liver, right? The ruach is connected to the heart, the neshama to the brain. The chaya surrounds the body like an aura. And then you have the yachida, which is not connected to the body, but it is really your link to the Shekhinah. You see. Okay. Now, what were you asking?
So now, V'shachanti betocham, Hashem is his main, that's Asherim Elokim. That's technically mostly in the neshama. Where in what part of us, in what part of the neshama, is it really that that Tzelem Elokim, the spark of Hashem? That
you mean the Shekhinah?
Not
you mean the Shekhinah, the divine presence?
Yes. But
that divine,
meaning the spark that we have within us, that Hashem gave us. We all have.
So that what that really is the Shekhinah, right? Is connected to the Yechidah. That's how you connect to the Shekhinah. And then from the Yechidah, whatever influence, energy is being radiated from God to the Yechidah, then goes to the Chaya, the Neshama, the Ruach, and then the Nefesh. But you are connected to God based on the Yechidah. That's why the Yechidah, in a certain sense, is so holy that it's not connected to the body, not the way the other 4 parts are. You see. So when it says V'shachanti b'soicham, right, it means that God connects to the neshama of every Jew through his Yechidah. And therefore, in an amazing way, you are the Beis HaMikdash. Because the essential idea of the Beis HaMikdash is that it is a residence of God. That's really what the essential idea is. You know what I mean? So who says, why do I have to go to an outside place to experience God? Right? You don't, really. So had the Jews not sinned at the golden calf, they would not have to go to the Beis HaMikdash to experience the Shekhinah. They would experience it within themselves, which is basically what's going to happen, right, to the Jews in the Messianic era. You see. Now, the Mishkan in those days is very important after the Chet Egel, like I say, because it's a place that you bring offerings, sacrifices, korbanos, which is a very important part of the avodah, the service of Klal Yisrael. And also, it's the place of unification of all the Jewish people 3 times a year. And that's what happens, the 3 regolim, or the pilgrimage festivals, you see, which everybody gets together. I mean, we don't even know what it was like when all the Jews went to Jerusalem to be part of Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot. It must have been unbelievable, you see. But in any case, really the Shekhinah enters the creation through the neshama, and always will. But because of the sin of the golden calf, God said, even though I enter through you, therefore you certainly can experience me, right? But because of the barrier of the Zoyama, which the Jews reintroduced in creation because of the sin of the golden calf, right? You will no longer experience me from within you, even though I enter you. You can only experience me if you go to the Beis HaMikdash. You see.
So now, do we have any access to our Yechida? What could we do to access it?
No, we have no access to the Yechida.
Technically, we can't really feel the presence of Hashem.
No, the one who has the Yechida, by the way, is Mashiach. Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David have the Yechida. In fact, the Yechida of all the Jews, Adam HaRishon had the Yechida of all the Jews, because he was really a composite of everybody. So his Yechida was gigantic, if you want to look at it that way. It was the Yechida of all Klal Yisrael. It's called Knesset Yisrael. So when he sinned, that split one half of the Yechida, and not only that, but it left him in order that it shouldn't be tainted by his sin of eating from the Eitz Hadas, which is really amazing. So the Yechida is the only thing of Adam HaRishon that does not have any kind of tumah, zoyama, klipa, whatever you want to call it, contamination at all, because it flew away or disconnected right before Adam ate from that tree. And later what happens is it splits. One half of Yechida goes to Mashiach ben Yosef, and the other half goes to Mashiach ben David. And that is what makes them the Mashiach. The Yechida is the crown that makes these people Mashiach. That is why they are so incredible, because they have everybody's Yechida. Not that they have your Yechida and they keep it. No, they have the Yechida. That means the power of the Yechida goes through their Yechida and connects to you. You see. So Yechida is the only aspect of the neshama of Adam HaRishon that was never defiled by his sin. And those are the messianic crowns. And only the true Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David have that, or will have that. And that is why they, in many ways, they can access the Orishan, the divine energy of the spheres. And they have the greatest amount of connection to God because of that. Yeah, it's just unbelievable what their power is, because they are or they have, I should say, the Yechid of Adam HaRishon. You see.
I once read that.
You once what?
I once read that the act of doing a mitzvah has 5 parts to it, and it correlates to the 5 parts of the neshama. And they said that the highest way to activate a mitzvah and to connect it to Hashem is do the mitzvah through happiness. And that's how you activate the mitzvah. You ever heard of that?
Well, no, I never heard that particular thought, but it's certainly an interesting thought.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with that.
do the mitzvah and then the action to do it. Like there was all 5 different steps, and the highest step was to finally do it through happiness, and that's when it really gets elevated to Hashem. And
well, I could see what whoever said that.
Nachman from Breslov.
Oh yeah, I could see why he said that. I don't know if you see that, because one of the klolos, one of the curses that God says, why He's bringing what's called the curses, the afflictions, the toicha in Bechukoisa. That's one of the reasons why the Jews are afflicted with terrible, punishments and so on. You see, so based on what he is saying, joy then would make a person worthy of punishment. The lack of it, I should say. You see? And that would certainly indicate, if that's one of the main ideas of why the Jews have to be punished, because they did not experience joy, simcha, I would call it more than happiness. Happiness is much lower. Joy is much higher, you see, because they did not experience the joy of doing the mitzvahs, or more specifically, the joy of being a prince of God and not worshiping Him with such ecstasy and joy. Yeah. And that's a very important part of the Avodah. The Ari, somebody once asked him, the great Kabbalist, the Ari, how are you zoicha? How did you merit to have this incredible amount of knowledge about Kabbalah? So he said that he was very careful that every time he did a mitzvah, right, he would, think about it and work himself up to an unbelievable state of joy. So the reward for that, you see, the fact that he was so unbelievably ecstatic, exhilarating, joyful, happy, you see, gave him an incredible merit to know the Kabbalah at the level that he knew, which is awesome. You see? So we do see clearly allusions to that joy is among the highest madrega level of achievement that a Jew can have. You see? You know why? You know what the logic is? If a person does something, right, the question is, what does he believe about what he's doing? What's his mindset or his belief set about what he's doing? Now, the way you can always see what a person's mindset is about what he's doing is to watch his emotions. If you see somebody with an incredible display of joy when he does something, then you know he really believes in that thing, that thing is valuable. Or else why is he so happy? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if you walk over to a guy and say, by the way, you just won the lottery, right? $400 million. It's yours. You know what that guy's going to do? That's assuming he would stay awake or that he wouldn't faint, right? He wouldn't know what to do with himself. The manifestation of joy would be beyond belief. Why? Because he believes that money will answer all his wishes. And he has just been granted all his wishes. So the joy is a reflection of what his real belief is in terms of what was just told him. Now, if you believe God exists, right, and that the mitzvah is going to give you Olam Haba, which is infinitely greater than $400 million, if you really believe that, guess what? Wild horses couldn't keep you back from doing that mitzvah. You'd run to do that mitzvah. The joy would be unbelievable. So in the end, joy is a disclosure about what your belief is about what you're doing, you see. So when God says, one of the reasons why I'm bringing the punishment, You didn't serve me with joy, which means that, did you really believe, that this is going to give you Olam Haba? No. Because if you really believed it, you would run to do the mitzvahs. You'd run to do every mitzvah because you would believe what it does. See, that's why joy, if you think about it, is among the greatest, maybe it is the greatest, of the levels of achievement. Because it indicates your belief about what you're doing, that it is really supreme in the eyes of God, and this will lead to a situation where you will be infinitely blessed. And this, therefore, was the problem, that Jews did not have that, and God said, I will bring the punishments, the afflictions, because you don't have joy. So if Rab Nachman said that, that's what he was alluding to. And the truth is, he's right. I'm just explaining why he's right, based on the Teichacha and what joy psychologically does for a person. Yes. If we really all believed in what a mitzvah really is, that it connects us to God directly, that it will get us Olam Haba, and it'll put us in a divine state of dvekus, we would run to do the mitzvah, you see. Just like a guy runs, let me tell you something, if a guy, has a lottery ticket, right? And like I said, use the previous example, and he found out that his lottery ticket has the winning number for $400 million, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to run to that place that he bought the ticket. He's not going to walk. If he does walk, it's because he's about to faint, But he's going to run because the belief in what that ticket will now give him is beyond expectations. It's unbelievable. Same idea with a mitzvah. And that's what the Ari said, that his ability, right, to know and therefore be unbelievably joyous was obviously of an incredible level. And that's why he was zoicha to know the secrets of God. You see?
Okay, so my next question is that Bnei Israel, they weren't, basically, for the first tablets, they weren't big enough of a vessel to receive the messianic light that those first tablets had, right?
Right,
so,
because of the sin of the golden calf, right.
Correct. So now, how are we going to be big enough of a vessel to receive that light?
The answer to that, it probably has several parts, First of all, you have to remember one thing, they were at the beginning of the job, so to speak. We're at the end of the job. We don't have that much to do, really. I once said, we don't realize that, but 98%, maybe 99% by now, of the sparks of holiness is back in the side of Kedusha, holiness. Yeah, we don't realize that. 99% of the job that the Jews have been struggling with for thousands of years, we're looking since Avraham Avinu, it's 4,000 years, is mostly done, you see. They, by the Chet Egel, they started out at that mission 3,300 years ago, So we could say that they had much more to do. But like I said, we're at the end of the job, really. So how much more is there to do? That's number one. The second thing is, in many ways, and this has been verified by Gedolim, In fact, your question, really, if I remember correctly, Reb Chaim Vital asked the Ari. He said, now who are we? We're really nobodies compared to the Amoraim and the Tanoim and the Nevi'im. Who are we really, And if they couldn't bring Mashiach, we're going to bring Mashiach. And I'll tell you something which is very important, that in a certain sense, we are greater than them. Do you know why? Because the test or the amount of reward, it says in the Gemara, lefum tsaro agro, right? Lefum tsaro, according to the pain, the effort, agra is the reward. That means two people could do the same mitzvah, but one person's reward is 1,000,000 times greater. Why? It's the same physical act. Because maybe one person had to give up an enormous amount. His test was much harder. His self-sacrifice was off the charts. So his reward is much greater than the other person who does the identical mitzvah physically. So that's a very important thing to remember. We live in a generation where our effort is much greater than the effort of previous generations. And this is what the Ari told Reb Chaim Vital. We live in a generation that's completely dark. We're in Memtesh Shari Tumah. We live in a generation where there are 49 levels of Tumah. There are so many distractions, so many Yetzer Haras. There are so many perversions out there, and there are so many foreign ideology, atheistic ideologies, theological ideologies, right? There is so much to distract us. It's unbelievable, you see? But because we live in a generation that is so much darkness, therefore when you do a mitzvah, it's much greater than when somebody else does the same mitzvah 1,000 years earlier. That's why. So even though it's easier to think of yourself, or ourselves, who are we? We're nobodies. It's true. In a certain sense, we are nobodies, right? I mean, what level of holiness have we reached? What level of righteousness have we reached? It's quite embarrassing. But because we live in a generation of some unbelievable hardship, darkness to be religious, you see, therefore every mitzvah we do counts millions of times greater than if you were in generation of, let's say, Rabbi Akiva, when they had people walking around that can do Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. You know what I'm saying? They were much greater than we are in that way. But we are greater not because of the physical act or the level of spiritual achievement. We are greater because our difficulty is much greater than these people. Therefore, our reward is greater. And even though we don't experience the same spiritual level as they, for obvious reasons, that's because the generation does not allow us to. But the day will come when the Messianic era will be open, right? And for everybody to see, then you will be given your proper reward of Nevuah and Vekas, based on your hardship, not necessarily only on your mitzvahs. Of course you have to do mitzvahs, but the real payoff is how difficult it is for us to remain religious. Look, there are 12 million Jews that are gone. That never happened before. They're not Torah observant. Many Jews don't even know they're Jews. And then what is there, 15 million Jews? That shows how hard it is to become a Jew. Or I should say remain a Jew, and to do the Torah and the mitzvahs. If 12 million people are gone, why are they gone? Because that indicates how difficult it is to remain Torah observant in this generation. You see? So every person that struggles daily to remain a believing Jew, emunim bitochen, is worth billions of dollars to God. We don't see that now, but we will see. And that, therefore, is the answer. You are not what you think you are. You meaning all of us. We are not what we think we are. We are millions of times greater than we can imagine. And to cap it off, now you understand. It says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, I think his son, went up to heaven. It is Chazal. He went up to heaven, and then he came down. It doesn't mean he went up physically. It means his consciousness was, he was able to see. He had Ruach Kodesh, so he could see in the world of Yetzirah. So they asked him when he came back, what did you see up there? So he uttered the famous statement, Oilim Hofachu. It's an upside-down world. Whoever was great here is basically almost a nobody up there. And whoever was a nobody here is an unbelievable guddle up there. How could that be? How could we not see who's really worth something? And the answer is because the critical, determining factor of who you are is not your physical act. It's the yagiyah, the hardship, the darkness of the klipa that you had to undergo to remain God-fearing, to believe and trust in God. And that you cannot see, you see? You can have Mr. A, who's unbelievably doing mitzvahs, and then Mr. B, who barely does any. But Mr. B may have an unbelievable struggle to do those couple of mitzvahs, which would make B much greater than A. Now, we don't see it here, but the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi saw it up there. And he said, you can't believe it. Guys who are nobody's here are guys who are walking around, they're gedolim up there. The question is how? And I'm telling you, we do not have the ability to measure righteousness. Forget about it. But I can tell you now, the level of righteousness of people who are Torah observant today is off the charts. We cannot believe the accomplishment that they do to bring the end. You see.
So Mashiach ben Yosef, he's the one that starts that messianic light coming in?
Yes. Yeah, because he has the yechid of Adam Rishon. So he has the real connection to the Shekhinah. For all of us.
Does that yechida does he give it to everyone at the same time, or does certain people get it first? How does that work?
You mean what's the sequence of giving it out?
Yeah, meaning if you did more mitzvahs, you'll or you have a more devekut to Hashem. So earlier on, you probably will access your yechida more quickly than people that didn't.
Well, that concept of incremental growth, that's true by Tchias HaMesim, which I once mentioned. That when Tchias HaMesim starts in what's today, 2022, in 8 years from now, that's when the Zohar says it starts, right? So it'll be incremental, which means it'll take 210 years for everybody to get up. So that depends on how thick your Zoyama is. And that obviously depends on, how much you were involved in Oyam HaZeh, So that's true. But the concept is when Mashiach ben Yosef comes and he is allowed then to introduce the Or Rishon, then it's open to everybody. The actual ability to connect to the Or Rishon will be simultaneous. But the amount, in a certain way, will be, proportional to your avodah, you see. But the mere fact that you are now open to the Or Rishon and you have no Zoyama automatically will place you a million miles ahead of where you are now. And we see that by the maidservant at Kriyas Yamsuf. Here's a woman, a maidservant, right? So you think about it, what's the big deal about her? Yet she saw more than Yechezkel Ezekiel, the prophet, who described Kabbalistically, right, the Ma'aseh Merkava, the divine chariot, right? So you can imagine, if this is what a regular maidservant saw, could you imagine what the other people, who are much greater in righteousness than this maidservant? So it's not so much, once it's open, it's open. The question is quantity. You see, that will probably be dependent on who you are. Just like resurrection of the dead depends on who you are. That's how they differentiate. There has to be some type of differentiation. There's what's called a commonality, a common occurrence, and then there's called occurrences which are based on your level of striving. So you really have both.